Hey guys, I hope you're doing well today. So this video is intended for people who want to use a few mods to change their vanilla Warhammer campaigns and turn them into a proper grand strategy experience. This is going to be similar to the videos on this topic that I've published before, but of course updated for the most recent update to the game and some new mods that have appeared on the workshop since the last mod list I published. Anyway, I'll go into more detail about what I mean by proper grand strategy in just a second, but I want to be respectful of your time, and I know this playstyle isn't going to appeal to everyone. So if you like the fast pace of vanilla play, or you think easier is better, or you like exploiting the AI or game mechanics to trivialize battles, this video is not going to be for you. No judgment. We all, of course, enjoy games in different ways, and there's no right or wrong here. You're just not going to be terribly interested in the mods in this video. Okay, with that out of the way, what do I mean by proper Total War experience? Basically, vanilla Warhammer is a great game in many ways, but deficient in a few others. It rewards nonstop aggression and lacks a real sense of punishment for things that should feel punishing, like heavy casualties in battle, losing your faction leader, things like that. Also, with the way endless aggression is favored, it lacks a certain depth when it comes to complicated strategy. There should be a time for aggression, of course, but there should also be time for defense. War should be less about endless advancing and more about back and forth attacking, maneuvering, defending, counterattacking, diversions and feints, probing actions, screening actions, and even occasional retreating when your lines are overextended. Capturing strong points shouldn't be a matter of walking up to a walled city, immediately launching a frontal assault, capturing this major objective in a few minutes of fighting without any significant casualties, and next turn going on to do it all over again. For one thing, it's not realistic, but much more importantly, it doesn't give the player the sense of accomplishment that it could or should. You deserve a dopamine hit when you raise or capture Middenheim as Khazrak, defeating your mortal enemy, Boris Tidebringer. Instead of immediately turning to your next target on the very next turn, give yourself a minute to savor the victory while your badly wounded army takes a few turns to recover. Anyway, hopefully you get the idea. The other deficiency in vanilla that I want to mention here is that for most campaigns, the only semi-challenging part is in the beginning. Far too often, you know by turn 40 or 30 or sometimes even less that you're going to win, and then the rest of the campaign becomes less of a battle between you and your enemies and more of a battle between a desire to paint the map and the tedium involved of moving your unstoppable forces around as fast as possible, all resolving your way to that long campaign victory, which robs you of one of, if not the best part of the Total War experience, the tactical battles. So the objective of this video is to show how we can address both of these deficiencies using a surprisingly small number of simple mods. 3 caveats for this video. It's going to focus on the campaign rather than battles. Improving battles is a big enough topic that it deserves its own video. In fact, even just a subset of battles, that being siege battles, I'm finding to be such a big topic that I'm breaking it down into 2 or 3 videos. So this one is just for campaign. The second caveat is that the mods I cover here are the foundation for that proper grand strategy experience, regardless of which faction you're playing. I'm actually working on shorter faction or legendary lord specific videos as for my recommendations to make each of them the best campaign possible, and those are meant to supplement the ones covered here. Finally, it's important to keep in mind that some of these mods are not balanced to have equal impact for every race or faction or legendary lord. Some will be affected more than others. I don't personally see this as a bad thing. I don't look for perfect balance in my Total War games because they never were in the historical titles that sucked me into this franchise in the first place. And in any case, sometimes I want a tough campaign and sometimes I want one that's a little more chill. But obviously that is a decision that you'll have to make for yourselves. Anyway, I think that that's enough of an introduction, so let's go ahead and jump into the foundational mods for a proper grand strategy campaign. The first 2 are staples that have been on this channel since my first Thorek campaign a year and a half ago. That one is minus 50% campaign army movement AI plus player. This is by Bascany. And this is the one on this list that hasn't been updated in a little while. Although I use this so regularly, I still feel pretty confident saying that it's working just fine. I'm not going to go through the entire description here, but the basic idea of it is that he's gone through and done exactly what it says on the tin. It has reduced the campaign army movement for both the AI factions and for the player by 50%. It does not affect the agent movement. So one thing to keep in mind is this is a little bit different than how the SFO setting that reduces campaign movement range, how that one works. So anyway, what this really does, and it really transforms the feel of every campaign, is it makes it so that you spend more time out in the field, and it takes a lot more than the usual single turn to go from one settlement to the next. It does mean that your campaign is going to slow down. It means that you're going to fight more field battles if you're out in territory where you're going to suffer attrition, or if you're vulnerable to ambushes. It does make those things more of a strategic consideration. But overall, the main effect that it has is it forces you to basically have to use a little bit more strategy, because you can no longer just do the endless aggression of bouncing from one settlement to the next, conquering, one with every army every single turn. It's really nice for those of you who use the old world mod, the old world map, where the settlements are a little bit farther apart. This is sort of a way to accomplish the same thing on the original Immortal Empires map, which is to basically just make it take longer to go from one settlement to the next. So anyway, like I said, it's been updated as recently as December of last year. I still use it in almost all of my campaigns, at least the non-SFO campaigns, so does seem to work. It does have a couple of special considerations, like the Khorne bloodletting decay has been altered to sort of accommodate the longer time that it's going to take to go from one army, from one battle to the next. So some of those things are taken into consideration here, but this is definitely one of the mods that I mentioned that is unbalanced in terms of it is definitely going to affect some lords, some starting positions more than others. There are definitely some cases where in vanilla, you would normally be able to fight the field battle against your starting enemy and then turn around and also conquer a settlement for your first conquest in that first turn. And there's definitely going to be a lot of campaigns that you can no longer do that. You're going to have to wait until the second turn to be able to take that first conquest. And so just be aware of that. It's not balanced. It definitely, in many ways, makes the campaign harder, although there is a trade-off to it, because you can actually also benefit from the fact that enemies can't as quickly roll out of the fog of war and into your territory and hit one of your settlements without warning. You, at least by slowing them down, have a better chance of getting a little bit of advanced warning to prevent, at least give you a little bit of time to react instead of that happening. So anyway, hopefully it makes sense. Pretty straightforward mod, works pretty well. Like I said, probably no other single mod, certainly of this size, will transform your campaign as much as this one does. Okay, next mod I want to talk about is one that reduces your replenishment. And I know there's some people that are already rolling their eyes saying, why on earth would you want to reduce your replenishment? Well, I alluded to that obviously earlier in this video when I talked about one thing that's lacking in vanilla Warhammer is that sense of punishment that happens when you fight a battle that just causes lots and lots of casualties in your armies. It really, realistically speaking, should take a while to recover from an extremely brutal battle like that. And at the same time, what a mod that reduces replenishment does for you is it adds a layer of strategic depth in terms of looking at your options that increase your replenishment, whether we're talking about Lord skills, whether we're talking about ancillaries, whether we're talking about technologies. There's different ways that this game provides to increase your replenishment. And, well, it it makes those things much more meaningful. You might find yourself having to actually consider taking some of those options that you used to really not have to worry about too much. Now, in the course of the last year and a half, I used to use a different mod. The one that I've been using recently is one of Serb's mods, and more on him in just a minute. But the one I'm currently recommending for people is War of Attrition, Reduced Replenishment. Again, it does basically the same thing. He has to go through in a mod like this, so does the other one. They go through and they have to reduce every single source of replenishment in the game, try to do it in a balanced way. Serb does a good job of staying up to date, staying involved in the comment section of his mods, so we know that he's staying on top of things. I've been using this one recently. It works pretty well. I really like what it does in terms of making those battles feel more meaningful, making it sometimes a little bit painful to win a really difficult battle because you know it's going to slow you down. Particularly some factions are going to, again, be affected more than others. You fight a war with the dwarves, a battle with the dwarves, and you lose 80% of your army, let's say. Even if you didn't lose any units, you know that that army is going to be out of commission for multiple turns while it's recovering. And we're going to talk a little bit more about another way to kind of contribute to this if you're really a glutton for punishment like I am. So let's go ahead and move on then to the next one. All right, so this next one is actually a pair of mods. You need both of them. This is Wounded Leaders Matter. And basically what this does is it makes it much more impactful to accidentally lose your legendary lord in battle. Instead of, basically your faction, maybe you lose a high-level lord, but other than that, there's no other effect. Well, this is going to add other effects. If you actually get your legendary lord wounded, then you start suffering public order problems, you suffer a morale hit, and there is a benefit to agent action success chance. And again, in the mod description, he talks about some of the reasons for all this, but I like it a lot because even though it rarely impacts you as the human player, if you do get yourself into the position where you've lost your legendary lord, you find yourself really counting down the turns until they come back and you no longer are suffering these debuffs. Of course, it also happens to the AI as well. And again, I think that makes sense. When you defeat the enemy faction leader, you should feel like, okay, that was an accomplishment that actually benefits me a little bit in my war against them. And so that's exactly what this mod does. Now, I mentioned that there are two of them because you need not only Wounded Leaders Matter, but you also need Wounded Leaders Matter Unofficial Update. So this one has been updated as recently as March 27. Basically goes into a little bit more detail here, but my understanding is that you do need both of them. All right, then I mentioned Serb earlier when it came to the reduced replenishment mod. Here we have another one of his. This is the scaling AI difficulty mod, and this is basically a good way to sort of mitigate some of the problem where the early game is the only challenge, where unfortunately the AI gets all of these what do we call it? All of these cheats at the beginning of the campaign, and those cheats don't really change as the campaign goes on. You play legendary difficulty, you're getting the same debuffs from the beginning all the way to the end, and the AI factions are getting the same cheats from the beginning to the end. Well, what this does is it recognizes that when you use a system where those numbers don't change at all, again, it just makes the early game the only really challenging part of the campaign. And once you overcome that first challenge, things just get way too easy moving forward. So the way that this addresses it is, like he says right here, every 10 turns, a script will fire off that gives any AI-controlled factions small stacking buffs too. And as you can see here, there are a whole host of different things that get benefits from it. So I'm not going to read all these out, but you can rest assured that he's thought of a lot of different variables here where we can slowly give the AI incremental benefits that over time really add up. He even tells you what they would achieve by turn 100. And this, again, is a way to make the early game a little less punishing than how it is in vanilla, but the longer you go on, the game continues to get more challenging because the AI factions continue to get these buffs. There's still cheats, of course. That can't be helped because the AI is just not going to be smart as a good human player will be. But this is a way to kind of help them out in a way that I think makes sense in order to keep things challenging, even as the player is gaining their own power. And likewise, human players do receive small debuffs to their public order. So kind of like what you would expect all the time with Legendary, well, this is giving an incremental debuff for their own numbers. One thing that you should be aware of with this mod is that the longer a campaign goes on, the funkier these numbers can be. I've certainly never reached that point, but he does point out that if, for example, you've got this upkeep that hits 30% reduction for the AI by turn 100. Well, if for some reason the AI starts to get literally above 100% upkeep reduction, they get pretty stupid. So that is just something to be aware of. I've not experienced that. My campaigns, even though I like them really long, they don't go on that long, but it is just sort of a word of warning that you should be aware of. Okay, and the last one that I'm going to talk about in detail in this video, although I'm going to mention something else here after this one. Anyway, this last one for this video is slower expansion and settlement supply lines, slow start version. This is again another one from Serb. Just started using this in recent months. I really like it a lot. And what this does is this really slows down your ability to steamroll. And the way that it does that is by giving you significant debuffs every time you occupy a new region. What it does is it basically looks at your nearby settlements that would be providing people, resources, what have you, to the new settlement that you just conquered. And the mod is basically saying, realistically speaking, this is disruptive for those settlements. They're having to give up some of their own stuff to be able to help sustain this new settlement, whether it's people or whether it's other types of resources. So it ends up affecting public order, replenishment, growth, and income. And it really, really adds a nice touch. It can be punishing, and there are other versions of this mod that you can look for yourself that aren't quite as punishing as this one. I really like it. What it basically means is when you conquer a new region, even if it's a region in your own starting province, for example, you will feel the hit to, in particular, your public order and your growth. So your region, your province is not going to automatically start growing at at the same speed that it ordinarily would. You can't just hit the ground running and expect this new settlement that has just switched hands over into your empire to be completely efficient. Instead, you're going to have to take a hit. It's going to slow down your population growth. And even more significantly, it's so disruptive to the area that it kind of, in many cases, forces you to keep some type of a military presence around to counteract the threat of a rebellion that could happen, or even to suppress that rebellion from happening because of the public order hit that you're taking. So again, I like it a lot. I think it adds value. I think it's realistic, but most importantly, what it really does is it completely changes that endless aggression steamrolling effect that generally happens in vanilla. It forces you to be a lot more thoughtful whenever you take a new region. Okay, so that's it for the ones in this video that I'm going to cover in detail. I did want to also mention that I do recommend also using mods that will strengthen the defenses in siege battles. And I think that this is such an important topic that I'm actually going to go into more detail on it in a separate video, and actually probably in multiple separate videos. I recommend doing things that increase your garrisons. I recommend doing things that slow down the speed at which ladders can be climbed up walls, for example, increase the health of towers and gates, things like that. There are mods out there that provide automatic buffs to the garrisons that are, that are the defenders in those types of battles. So I'm going to talk about all of those things in more detail in a separate video. Like I said, I do think that battles in general and siege battles specifically are worthy of, they're a big enough topic that they're worthy of a video or two on their own. So anyway, there you have it. These are all mods. The ones I talked about here are all mods that I'm using in my campaigns. That are my Let's Plays on this channel. If you're not familiar with any of those Let's Plays and you want to see how some of these mods actually work in practice, you can take a look at any of those campaigns and you will see them. I have included footage from some of those campaigns as I've been showing off some of these mods during this video. Anyway, as always, I do welcome feedback. So I do hear on a fairly regular basis many of you saying that you've tried using some of these mods as well. And obviously they're not for everybody, but I'm glad to hear that there are any number of people out there who are like me and like the changes that these mods make to their campaign. And like I said, you can look for more detail coming up in the near future about battles, about siege battles, and I'm also making some videos that are more specifically tailored to individual factions and legendary lords in terms of basically making those campaigns the best they can be. All right, anyway, I will go ahead and leave it at that. Again, I welcome any feedback. Thanks everybody for watching and listening, and I will see you in the next video.